When taking up a new leadership position, people face certain common challenges. The first is really getting up to speed and learning as quickly as possible about the new role, but also about the culture that they're operating in and the political and social network of which they're a part. The other challenges really depend on the nature of the transition you're going through. If you're coming in from outside an organization to a new unit, then those cultural and political issues are really the most important. But if you're being promoted to a higher level, a lot of it's about learning to be effective at that level. What does it mean to be a good leader at the new level? How does that differ from what you did before? So there's some common core challenges around learning and connection, but there's also some transition-specific challenges really depending on the type of role change you're experiencing. To successfully overcome those challenges, you need to be focused early on really accelerating the learning process. And this is about learning the role, the job, of course, but it's also focusing a lot of effort on making sure you understand the culture that you're operating in and how it may be different in subtle ways from the culture you were operating in before. Even within organizations, different units can have different ways of doing things, different subcultures. So it's critical to be understanding that. If you're coming into an organization from the outside, making sure you're connecting with the key stakeholders, with your team if you're a leader. The learning and connecting are really the biggest priorities you have early on, typically when you're taking a new role. What else you need to focus on depends a lot on the particulars of the situation that you're facing. When you go to a higher level, you need to rethink how you delegate work. You need to rethink the kind of presence you need to have as a leader. You need to rethink how you influence. So being very clear early on how does this new level of leadership differ from what I was doing before? And what can I do still that I'm good at and leverage my strengths, but also what's the gap I need to cross, right? What are the things I need to learn to be effective? I often recommend people find someone who is an effective leader at that level and try to understand what it is that has made them successful there and begin to emulate some of those kinds of behaviors. Often people who become general managers have been very effective in leading a function or leading a specialty, and now they're leading multiple functions or multiple specialties. That could be project leadership, it could be general management, but there's a big adjustment that you need to make as you go from being focused on more a single function to managing cross-functionally. How do you really operate effectively as a generalist? How do you integrate the work of those people? You can no longer rely on your functional or specialist expertise to really be a basis for your leadership, right? You typically need to move up in terms of strategy. You need to engage with the external environment more. So the move from being a more functional or specialist leader to being a cross-functional leader is a very challenging one. Anytime you bring someone into your organization from the outside, that could be an external hire, it could be moving people between parts of the organization. Rapidly understanding the culture is really critical. It helps a lot if the organization understands something about its own culture and is able to communicate that in a reasonably transparent way. Otherwise, the new leader has to sort of figure it out, right? You have to kind of puzzle out what the culture is all about. The one caveat I have is the organization really does need to be willing to be open about its real culture and not the culture it wishes it has, right? Or the culture it could have at some point, because that's just very confusing for somebody. If they're not getting really good information about the culture, it's not very helpful. If the organization can communicate about the culture, it's incredibly valuable to do so. Most of the time when leaders take new roles, they don't get to build their teams. They get to inherit somebody else's team, and then they need to think about how to assess and reshape and align and accelerate that team, potentially in new directions. So the first part of that is really doing the assessment of the team you've inherited. And a core part of that is figuring out first, what are the most critical roles that people are playing in this organization? I say don't focus too much right away on the people. Focus first on understanding the roles. because some roles will be more important than others. And that gives you some clues then, an orientation to beginning to assess the people, right? Focus first on the critical roles, focus next on do you have the right people in those critical roles, and then you can look more broadly at the team as a whole. The assessment process is a challenging one, right? You need to be organized to do it, you need to be asking the right questions, you need to be observing closely the dynamics of the team to understand really who has influence, really who's contributing at a high level. You want to focus early on understanding, who are your A players, who are your B players, and who are your C players. And you want to be leveraging and encouraging and developing the A players. You want to be evaluating whether you're okay with the B players in the positions that they're in. And really you want to be focusing hard on what are you going to do about those poor performers. And doing classic performance management work with them to either get them to be a B player or figure out what you're going to do. But there's another axis, which is the axis of attitude, right? Do people have the attitude that's going to support the culture that you're trying to create in this organization or not? And if they don't, that may be a reason that they really can't be a part of your team in the long run. You can have someone who is a player, but really poisonous to the culture of an organization. You can have someone who's a B player, who's the heart and soul of the team. So being careful to think about both of those dimensions is really critical. If you've got someone who is consistently negative on your team, you need to be thinking about how can you potentially either reshape that behavior or make it not have an impact on your organization so much, right? That can be isolating the person somewhat in the role they're in. That can be trying to understand the roots of that behavior. There's a variety of things you can try to do. But it's really crucial if you're trying to build a high-performance culture that you don't let things like that infect the whole organization. So in every transition into a new role, it's important for the new leader to begin to establish credibility in the environment that they're operating in. What credibility is depends a lot on the leader, and it depends a lot on the situation, right? For most leaders, it's about establishing their leadership point of view. How do they lead? What do they care about? How are they going to work with people in the organization? There's not much you can do right away in terms of actual impact operationally on the organization. It's really mostly about perception early on. Do you have the right presence? Do you seem to be someone that people can trust? Right? Are you focused on the right things? Are you connecting with people in the right way? And that's not necessarily just people at high levels. It can be very powerful to be connecting to people at the lower levels, right? So the key thing really is to focus on what is credibility in this new role. What does it look like, right? It's a different thing for a CEO than it is for a frontline manager. For a frontline manager, right, you may have been a technical contributor, now you're a leader for the first time, right? You may be leading people who were previously your peers, right? They need to begin to see you not as a super contributor, but as a leader that's going to help them accomplish their work.